Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Erika.
And I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And this is our podcast, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadows of Resistance. In this podcast, we talk about that resistance, the issues that prevent us from being socially just and free. The goal here, as many of you know, is to disrupt the status quo of racial inequality and inequity in systems. Each episode, we really challenge ourselves and each other and you to be the change that we want to see. And so we've been in a series called Justice for All. We've been talking about different types of justice. And today we're actually going to have a conversation about an experience that Tonya was fortunate enough to have. We're just going to learn from, I'm going to hear about her experiences and just learn some of the things. She's going to share some of the things that she learned during this journey through justice.
Yeah. So thank you, Erika. I had the privilege to travel to Montgomery and Selma, Alabama, the seat of the civil rights movement. And I have to say that this trip was transformational in so many ways. For those of you who aren't familiar with, Montgomery, Alabama, Montgomery is where the bus boycott happened in 1955 with Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
But Rosa Parks was not the first person who,
No, she wasn't.
who boycotted, not boycotted, who refused to give up her seat.
Right.
She was just the face of that movement. But while there, we really had an opportunity to visit a couple of really important places in Montgomery, and then we traveled the road to Selma, and it was we rode on the path that those who marched for the Civil Rights Act and who marched for change in America, we traveled the road that they traveled, which was really, really, really powerful. So I have to start with the Montgomery trip.
Okay.
So we were visiting the Legacy Museum. So some may be familiar with the Legacy Museum. It's a relatively new museum that depicts our history from the enslavement period to mass incarceration.
Oh, wow.
So even just that,
Yeah.
and there's no photography in this museum. So we literally just have to sit with whatever we experience as we go through it. And there's one way in and one way out. So, there's no going backwards. You can, if you need to step out, you can step out and come back in. But really you're going through this experience.
Yeah.
And if you have an opportunity to visit the Legacy Museum, I highly encourage everybody, because what we often don't realize is that Black history is American history.
Sure.
And there's a narrative that we hear about that often doesn't tell the story that needs to be told.
Yeah. I agree with you. I wonder though so I know when I watch a documentary or when I go to a museum and, it tells the story of, the experiences of African Americans in this country, sometimes I can be triggered. Because I feel so, it's just, I just feel so, I don't know if sad is the word, or there's some frustration, there's some anger, just a flood of emotions. I imagine that you experienced that as well. How did you work through that? Like, how did you, was there something that impacted you the most, and how did you work through that?
Yeah, it was it was powerful, but it was really emotional. It was a very sobering, somber kind of a trip. And in particular, this museum, and I'll talk more beyond the museum as well. But, when you first go in, it starts with the enslavement period. And, what we often don't realize is that transatlantic slave trade did not just take place on American soil. It also took place in South America, in Canada, in Caribbean countries, and so we were not the first country that people were captured and against their will and brought over the ocean.
Very true.
Through the Middle Passage. And so one of the first things that kind of arrested me was this memorial, if you will, within the museum of sculptured heads of depicting those who had gone through the Middle Passage, with the ocean water kind of rushing past them.
Wow.
And it was almost like a graveyard of sorts, and you're kind of walking through. And when I say it, I didn't expect that, we didn't know what to expect. Because again, there's no photography in here. So it's not like I saw pictures in advance. So I'm walking in and it's like, whoa. And it's just a stark, like, visual of the people who were stolen from their land, brought over to America against their will, under conditions that were very violent, that were dehumanizing, that was very threatening in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
Every sense of the word. And, if we were to think of anything that good that could have come out of it, it was, we're here because of them.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there were some who lived through the torture and lived through all that happened so that we could be here to tell their story. And what I think often happens is there's not an opportunity to hear the narrative of those who have been enslaved.
Yeah, sure.
And this particular museum does an amazing job telling the story of the enslaved people that were brought over to this country. One other piece in answer to your question that actually broke me down was the part of the museum. So it's chronological. So it starts with the enslavement period, then we have emancipation, and then Jim Crow, and the lynchings that took place during the Jim Crow era after emancipation. And we're talking about, thousands of Black people whose lives were taken from them as a result of stupid things, just whatever some, white person in that time and era felt they could do to create horror for Black families in the Black community, they did. And just, they had theaters where you could see film. They had all kinds of artifacts from history. And I have to tell you, at one point, I literally broke down. Like, I had to excuse myself and, go into the restroom and just collect myself. It was just, it was very overwhelming. Like, very, very overwhelming.
Yeah. I know there are a number of people that I know that live, north of Maryland, that they don't like to go down south. They don't like to go because they don't feel, either welcomed, or it's a reminder, sort of this like generational kind of reminder of injustice and degradation.
Yes.
And yet you went, right? And, is that something that you would recommend for others to go? Is this something that you would recommend for, African Americans to experience? And how would you recommend that they kind of push past their aversion to going south?
So my recommendation would be that every American visit that museum. Every American. Because I think in our country, we tend to want to hide behind the history of this country. And yet it's that history that is really important for us to know. When we think about what our ancestors had to endure in the South, oftentimes that story is not told.
Right.
Even in our own family.
Sure.
My grandfather's father, I think I've said this before, my grandfather's father was enslaved. And I don't know much of anything about his situation. I knew about when they migrated north from Mississippi, and I knew that my grandfather swore he would never return to the state of Mississippi because of the horrors that he saw and was inflicted on not just, people that he knew, but people, Black people around them. And, his own brother was forced out of Mississippi. And he too could have been one of those that was lynched had it not been for a warning that he was given. And what's really terrible is, a lot of times the lynchings would take place because people wanted to register to vote. I mean, something that we often take for granted. We don't realize people lost their lives because they wanted to register to have their voices be heard on the ballot. And then when the laws changed that said you have to allow them to vote, they put up all kinds of barriers. And I actually have an artifact.
You were sharing some of that. You have to share some of this.
It was just, so what would happen is they would, during the Jim Crow period, the powers that be, if you will, did not want Black people to vote. And just like during the enslavement period, they didn't want Black people to be able to learn how to read. Right. They didn't want Black people to have a vote. And so they would create these exams that, people would have to go and take. Just read any one of them. Okay. These are 3 different exams.
Okay. So at the top it says, to register to vote in this state, you must correctly answer the questions in this examination. So one question is, how many seeds are in a watermelon? That's one of the questions. In what year did Congress gain the right to prohibit the migration of persons to the states? I'm not even sure what that means, first of all, right? How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? This is actually on this exam. This is crazy. Draw a figure that at the bottom of this sheet that is square in shape. Divide it in half by drawing a straight line from its northeast corner to its southwest corner. Then divide it once more by drawing a broken line from the middle of its western side to the middle of its eastern side.
Absolutely ridiculous.
This is crazy. This is craziness. How many jelly beans are in the jar in front of you? That's a question on this exam to register to vote. Clearly, these are so silly, but think about somebody who wants to vote.
Right.
The intent here is we are going to stop you. You are not going to pass, right? That's the intent here.
Right.
This in and of itself, I'm angry all over again. You shared this with me before, but really,
in many ways. That's the kind of foolishness, that our ancestors had to put up with just to have rights in this country. And we're living in a day and time where they're trying to silence that history in some of our states. They don't want people to know. They don't want children to know.
That's right.
And we did have the privilege of listening to Bryan Stevenson. So that was like a really bright spot of that trip. And Bryan Stevenson is the author of the book Just Mercy. There was also a film.
There was also,
And he's brilliant. He's a brilliant attorney, civil rights attorney who has fought for the rights of, individuals on death row, individuals who have had injustices against them in the justice system. He has done some amazing work. He's also behind the Legacy Museum and the Peace and Justice Memorial, which is also known as the Lynching Memorial, which was another piece of that. But Bryan Stevenson said something that was really really important. He said, our country is not good with apologizing. But if you go to South Africa or if you go to Berlin, you're going to not only know that those countries have come out of something horrific in terms of how they treated their people, but you're also going to know that no more. Like, this is not acceptable. This is not allowed. Like, if you go into Berlin, there are no statues of Hitler in Berlin. The students are learning about the Holocaust. Often they know all about it. There are memorials all over the place that honor the lives that were lost and memorializes the lives that were lost during the Holocaust. In our country, in the state of Alabama, for Martin Luther King Day, they celebrate Martin Luther King / Robert E. Lee Day.
That is absurd.
One of the generals from the Confederate Army.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of statues across the Confederate South, if you will, depicting heroes from the Confederacy. In other words, basically their narrative just continues. There's been no apology and no correction that's been made. There hasn't even been reparations, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yes, it is.
That we're not going to have today.
Yeah. And so, did you come upon, or even did he talk about, like, okay, so now what do? We know that this is the reality. We know that, like you said, there's very much still a Southern narrative, when we think about, some of the outcomes that African Americans have in this country, socially, in the criminal justice system, in education. So what are some of the strategies? Like, what are some of the remedies for this?
That's a great question. I actually have answers to that. I took notes when I was talking.
Okay.
Someone actually asked the question, what should we be thinking about? And his response was, first of all, we need to have proximity to those who've been marginalized. And he tells the story of the first time he went to visit someone on death row. What we often think of is we see the crime that they've made and we've kind of like made the crime them versus seeing the individual for who they are. And he's like, if we are close to those who have been marginalized, it gives us an opportunity to understand their story and to see them, which is really important. Another thing he talked about was being involved in the narrative change work. So that's what you and I are
Yes,
doing
yes,
here.
absolutely.
Like, this is what we do with our podcast. We are involved in that. We've got to continue this work. It's really important. He also says, do what's uncomfortable. Do the uncomfortable, inconvenient things. And so when I think about the uncomfortable, inconvenient things, I think it's when we speak out against injustice, that's uncomfortable now in this country to do that. Now, we don't have the same level of risk of lynching that some of our ancestors had, but we still can face some repercussions that, could hit us in the pocket, for example, or could, cause problems for our families or what have you, potentially. He also says that we need hopefulness. We need to fight against hopelessness, which is once we get to a place where we're hopeless, then we don't want to do anything about what's going on. And we don't have what we need to do something about the injustices that are happening still across this country. And so that's a great question, because that was something that he talked about.
I love that last part, because I think in this country, for African Americans and for some other marginalized groups, it is so easy to feel hopeless, like things are never going to change, or they're never going to get better. But I love that last part about being hopeful, because then like, oh, well, we've got hope, like something, we can do something about this. You also talked about while you were there, a trip to Selma.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Selma actually just kind of gripped my heart. So first of all, Selma is a part of my own family lineage. My great-great-grandparents are from Selma. My great-grandmother is from Selma. My grandmother is from Selma. And my grandmother and great-grandparents actually migrated to Chicago from Selma in around 1935, is what I'm
Okay.
told. While we were in Selma, we had an opportunity to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So the Edmund Pettus Bridge is the bridge that is known for Bloody Sunday, in March 7th, I believe, 1965.
Okay.
And that is, we've seen, like former President Obama walk across that bridge, our current president walk across that bridge, in memory of Bloody Sunday.
Yeah.
And Bloody Sunday was a day that, a group of people marched, and were protesting the injustices that were happening to Black people in America.
Yeah.
And it was known as Bloody Sunday because individuals got hurt. So, the late John Lewis was one of those individuals. We've heard about his story, and if not, I encourage you to just look up John Lewis, and the work that he did in civil rights, fighting for the rights of mankind. And one thing that was really interesting about Selma is Selma has, they are the seat of our civil rights movement between Selma and Montgomery. And a lot happened in Selma. And one of the things, we had an opportunity to meet the mayor of Selma. And he said, you're talking about that narrative piece, the story that needs to be told. He said, the story of Selma doesn't start in 1965. The story of Selma starts in 1865.
Wow.
The last Civil War battle took place in Selma, Alabama.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That was news to me. But what I did notice is that the city itself needs a lot of help. They need help with infrastructure and logistics. They need resources. They need small businesses and large businesses and corporations. They need a tax base. They need support in their school system. They need resources.
Yeah.
And I just felt this pull there because of the historical seat that they are. They have not been able to benefit from a lot of the resources that other communities have had an opportunity to benefit from. They've lost out a lot, and they haven't been able to reap the benefits, almost like they're being punished for their role in the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was something that, that the mayor actually conveyed. And it really touched me, to the point that, I was there with a group of people from NYU, where I graduated, one of the places where I graduated. And they were all leaders, the individuals that were there. And we were all so moved that we're looking to collaborate around how can we support this dynamically historic city that really needs a lot of resources and a lot of support. And it's a city that's over 80% Black, and, like many cities, and it's a small city. So we're not talking about a big city. It's a small city that has lost a lot of resources over the years.
Wow. I mean, that is so, because we've talked about this. So I've kind of had some time to think about it. Selma sounds like, some other cities that have, kind of faced some kind of like decline. Would you say that Selma is like the residents of Selma, because I know that, they lack, infrastructure. I would assume that then Selma's residents, just face sort of like almost like a cascade of different types of not discriminations, but oppressions and marginalization and the like.
Absolutely.
Would you? Yeah.
And sadly, when people leave Selma, they don't come
back. Yeah.
And it's because when they don't come, there's nothing to come back to. Not nothing. There is something to come back to, but there's a lot that has been taken and removed.
Sure.
So at one point there was a military base there and an airport, and now it's an abandoned strip of land. And so imagine if there was commerce in the city, or if there was an opportunity, if there's tourism. And people come there to see the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but then they leave, and there weren't restaurants that we could go to. I mean, there may be some.
Yeah.
We just didn't see what you would expect to see in a city that holds so much of our country's history and really pivotal history.
Sure.
History that created opportunities that you and I are reaping the benefits from today. And I just feel like, if you're watching this, like, open up your heart, quite honestly, to think about, like, how might you be able to support a city with such a rich history?
Yes. And I'm so interested to see what will happen as a result of this. And I know that for some of us, it will require educating ourselves, and it will require us to, find out some of the, some of the resources, that we can gather. But you brought home a few, so could you just talk about that?
So,
could you just talk about them?
Here is a book that I was able to purchase while I was there that really just kind of talks about Selma in 1965. It's a picture and story book, if you will.
I love it.
That just shows a lot of history, that transpired during that time, and it's a great opportunity to be able to learn about what happened. Another book that I picked up while I was down there, lies my teacher told me, everything your American history textbook got wrong.
That is.
So this isn't just about Selma. This is really just about history. I started reading it. When we talk about teaching students to be able to analyze their socio-political context, I saw really great questions that students can use to be able to question what they're reading about different places.
Yeah.
So who's the author? What's their ideology? What's their gender, their race, their sex? What's their socioeconomic status? What bent do they have, if you will? Where do they get their information? Does their information match other resources that are out there? There's a lot of...
That's so, I love that. It just reminded me when I taught AP, one of the things that we started with was like, what is the author's positionality?
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
When were they writing? What were they writing about? What were some of their previous, activities, politically or otherwise, literary? What kind of background did they have? Because all that makes a difference.
Right.
But what I love here is that do this for everybody.
Yes.
Right?
We all
do this
that,
for everybody.
especially now when we're living in such a polarized environment. There's a lot of resources and artifacts out there that will that provide evidence of what really happened and what really transpired. So case in point, there was in this book, and I only just started reading it, but in this book there is a depiction of a 6th grade teacher who is teaching her students history, and she says to her students, many of the U.S. presidents before Abe Lincoln were slave owners. Students were outraged, like, how dare you? That can't be true. Mad at the teacher. And they were like, that can't be true because we read in the textbook, there's nothing in our textbook that says that they owned slaves. And she's like, well, maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong. So each of the kids started to do their own research on each of the presidents and came back angry with not just not with the teacher this time, but with the publishers of their history books.
Wow.
Because they were like, why is this not in here? This is really important information.
Wow.
And these are 6th graders, so that was like really powerful.
Yeah.
But it just tells us that we've got to be careful. Like, even as parents, it's our responsibility as well. Not just the school system.
That's right.
To learn about our history and
right.
the full history.
That's right. That's right.
And teach our children.
And because kids can handle it.
They can.
There's a lot of, I think, I don't want to say foolishness, but there's a lot of rhetoric around not making kids feel bad and everything like that. But the truth is that kids can handle it.
They can.
They can handle it, especially when we, approach this, with empathy, but we approach it with the correct information. They can handle it. And just like those kids were like, wait a minute, why didn't we know? And what a powerful statement that is, to why isn't this in here?
Right.
And you
Right.
need to address this.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing
thank you for letting me
your
share.
journey. When you came back and told me about it, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to have to get down there, and I'm really
Yes.
looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
I want to take
Yeah.
yours back as well. It's
Yeah.
really, really important that we go.
Yeah. So thank you again.
Thank
you
you.
again. And thank you for joining us. I'm Erika Leek.
And I'm Dr. Tonya Breland. And we hope that you follow us on social media, and we'd love to hear what you think about this episode.